And we are joined by John Creighton, who is running for re-election to the Port Commission position number 1. So go ahead and start with the
Well, thank you for having me tonight. I've been before the 36 before, but it hasn't been for a while, so I'd like to start off by telling you a little bit about my background. I'm a corporate lawyer by training. I grew up locally over in Bellevue, went to Interlake High School, started my practice in Washington, D.C., then went overseas for a while, moved back home to the Seattle area in 2000, and ran for Port Commissioner for the first time in 2005, and I'm in my second term. I'm looking to retain my seat for a third term, and I think we've made a lot of good progress at the port. The port is a critical jobs engine for our region. It impacts some 200,000 jobs between the airport and the seaport and everything that goes on there. But when I first ran for Port Commissioner, I felt that that was a huge value for our region, but it wasn't doing everything right. There were things that Port could be doing better. And I think we've made good progress over the last 8 years in terms of making the Port more accountable agency. We hired a new CEO who's put into place really good controls and procedures over taxpayer money and how to track it and how it's spent. We've made progress on environmental issues. We've reduced air emissions at the seaport by 40 to 60% in some areas, and we've done a lot of good at the airport. And in general, we've also put together our 25-year plan to help create 100,000 new port-related jobs for our region. And so I'd like to serve one more term to really help move that plan forward. I'm honored to already have the endorsement of the Puget Sound pilots, the Port Firefighters 1257, the Sailors of the Pacific. I've been recommended for an endorsement by the King County Democrats and the King County Labor Council.
Great, thank you. So now we have 5 prepared questions that we're asking all candidates for Port Commissioner. I think we left off with Michael. You do number 1.
Sure.
Excuse me.
What is your plan to keep the Port of Seattle competitive when other ports offer similar services at lower costs?
That is a very good question. The commission and staff, we were just over in Eastern Washington a couple of weeks ago and got an earful from Eastern Washington farmers and other exporters about port competitiveness. And you really have to look at every element of the supply chain. 70% of the cargo that comes into the Port of Seattle actually doesn't stay in the region, it ends up in the Midwest. So we have to make sure that the shipping rates coming to Seattle, the truck rates going from the terminal to the rail yard, the rail rates going to the Midwest, the harbor pilot rates, all of that is competitive. We have to make sure that the freight mobility is good throughout our region. There's a lot of moving parts, and a big part of that for future growth is supporting the transportation package before the legislature that Judy Cliburn is pushing right now. It's critical to get 509 built and extended from the airport south to I-5 because we're looking to triple air cargo. We're looking to almost double seaport cargo, and we need those trade corridors to be efficient. We also need to really look at land use policies to protect industrial. South Seattle industrial businesses represent a third of the city of Seattle's tax base. And so that is something I don't think we can play around with. We have to be protective of it. And that's why the arena being in Soto, that proposal has really concerned me. I'm in favor of the Summits coming back to town. I think it's a good economic development initiative. But I think we need to look carefully at that because to mitigate that arena, and some estimates will cost from $300 to $500 million in freight corridor projects through Soto. Also, we need to look at tax policy, and I'll leave it there.
Great. John, number 2.
What specific plans do you have for making the port more sustainable and to limit its environmental footprint?
That is a very important question for our region. I grew up, my dad was in the forest products industry for 30 years. He loved the woods, so I grew up, hiking the Cascades, the Olympic Peninsula, Mount Rainier as a kid. Was instilled with a real environmental ethic, and I don't think you can live here long without really getting a sense of the need to store our natural environment, our natural beauty. And so when I first got to the port 8 years ago, there was a real conflict between the port, the business community, and the environmental community. The environmental community had some serious issues with some of the port's practices, and they were really threatening to not shut us down, but to stop growth that creates good-paying jobs for our, good-paying industrial jobs for our region. And I looked at this, and I don't claim any original thinking, but you know, you really, if you look at it, to be a financially sustainable port well into the future, you also have to be an environmentally sustainable port, because you can't be polluting our environment, creating brownfield sites that 30 years from now are going to cost billions of dollars to clean up. We need to be responsible stewards in the present moment. And so we've worked with the Port of Tacoma on air mitigation strategies that again have reduced emissions by some 60%. We're cleaning up brownfield sites on the Duwamish and looking to work with the EPA on the broader Duwamish Superfund site project at the airport. We've electrified all our ground support equipment. We're working with Boeing and Washington State University on looking at biofuels to power planes. We've reduced energy usage by some 25%, and we have an award-winning recycling program that not only recycles the usual things like glass and plastic and paper, but also cooking grease and coffee grounds. So we've really been able to instill a great environmental ethic throughout the organization.
Item number 3.
Do you support the salary increase for port commissioners, and do you support other changes or reforms of the port commission itself?
Yes, I do, and I know that was controversial, the salary increase, but you know, I'm prepared to defend it because I think, I mean, you can argue whether port commissioners should be paid. I don't think there is any argument that the port commission is part-time. It's not like a corporate, you know, the port, I describe it as a business owned and operated for the public good, but we're not like a corporate board that might meet once a month. We have 3 standing public meetings a month. Sometimes we have 4 public meetings. Each of us are on outside boards on behalf of the port. I'm on the Freight Mobility Strategic Investment Board appointed by the governor. I'm on the Visit Seattle Convention, the Visitor Center Board. I'm on the Highline Forum, a board composed of airport community-related electeds. I'm on the Puget Sound Regional Council, and all my colleagues are on similar boards. It takes minimum 20 hours a week to be a port commissioner. So I think to do it right, you need to spend the time. And I don't think it should be just a position that only retirees or rich people can do. I think we need a broader base of people looking at running for port commission, because I think public agencies should reflect the community.
Dana, number 4.
John, what role should the Port Commission play in maintaining and increasing family wage jobs and green jobs?
I think we have a huge role to play. You know, there's some of the jobs created by the port are amazingly good paying jobs. I mean, a senior crane operator, you don't even need a college education. You can make up to $250,000 a year. Harbor pilot can make $350,000 a year. These are great paying jobs that we need to keep in our community, but the flip side, the side that the port officials don't often talk about, are some of the not so good paying jobs, like the sky caps at the airport. You can have worked at the airport as a sky cap for 30 years. It's not, you don't get paid time off, but it's even worse than that. If you try to take time off without pay and your employer doesn't like it, he'll fire you. I mean, there's been cases like that. So I think, and we're a public agency, and while I don't think we should always be sticking our nose into our private company tenants' business, I think we need to promote a real strong ethic at the port and within our tenants about, you know, we need to be looking at creating good paying jobs with good benefits that people can support families on, and so they don't have to be looking at, you know, welfare to supplement their incomes.
So what are some of the ways in which you can do that?
Actually, we need to do a follow-up to later.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Really? Because we have time, sorry.
Do we have time?
Yeah. What we did.
Oh, okay.
Well, why don't we save it just because we have to...
Oh, I can give one example, if that's...
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm a stickler for the rules, but go ahead with what you found.
Well, so, 2007, 6 years ago now, the airport staff looked at all the wheelchair workers are hired by separate airlines. I mean, they're wheelchair worker companies hired by separate airlines. The airport staff looked, hey, if we could consolidate those wheelchair workers under one contract directly with the airport, charge back the airlines, we could save $1 million a year on those contracts. And the idea was to put it back in the workers' pockets in terms of increased wages or medical benefits or what have you. And I really thought that was forward thinking by the staff. And then the airlines originally were inclined to look at it, but then it sort of went up the flagpole and they said, hey, if you're going to save $1 million, we want that. We're struggling still as an industry. We want that in our pocket. And we just dropped it. I thought we should have just kept pushing it and working with the airlines to get them comfortable with it.
Clayton, number 5.
Do you believe we have achieved full transparency in the port's contracting and compensation practices? And where do you see possibilities for further improvement?
Compensation, staff compensation.
Jeff?
So we can't clarify.
Oh, okay.
Whatever you make of it.
Well, contracting, we've made a lot of good progress. We had a critical state audit regarding the third runway back in 2008, and we really worked to reform our policies and procedures because, not keeping track of taxpayer money, that's not good. And we're a public agency, we have an obligation to do that. But I think it's created a lot of red tape on the other side of the issue. So we need to work, and it scared off a lot of businesses. I mean, only the big businesses with big pockets can afford to really look at, win their way through the red tape and do business with the port. We need to make it more possible and more efficient for small businesses to be doing business with the port. One of our 25-year goals is to increase small business contracting up to 40% of port contracting. And I don't think we can get there unless we start looking at reforming port procedures. On the compensation side, there's some of my colleagues who argue we have to pay big wages or big money to the port CEOs to attract the best talent. And I agree. I agree that we're a business and we need to attract the best talent. I don't think we need to make our port CEO the highest paid CEO in the country. I voted against the 4-year contract that my colleagues passed because I think, I think Teo Shatani has been doing a wonderful job, but I just am philosophically against the head of the public agency having a long-term contract. I think he or she should be at will working for the board. So I think we have a ways to go in that as well. Although I think with the controversy over the Expeditors Board and other controversies, my colleagues, I think, have seen some of the wisdom of what I was trying to convey when I voted no on the agreement.
All right, thank you. So now we'll go to follow-up questions. People can ask anything they want. These are 1-minute answers. David and Elizabeth. Go ahead, David.
I think John wants to start.
Oh, you should go first.
Okay.
Open one.
So, as Jeff has explained, we asked 5 questions, the same questions for each candidate for a given office. And our question number 3, I heard half of it answered, but not the other half, so I'm going to follow up on that one. So the first part of the question is, do you support the salary increase for port commissioners? You defended the increase. But the second part,
Other changes?
Other changes or reforms of the port commission itself. I'm just wondering if you could give us a broad.
Well, there's 2 good questions in there. I don't, I have 1 minute? There's been proposals within the port commission structure. Should we hire up more of our own staff? Should port commissioners have their individual staff? I don't think so. I think I've supported increases in port commission staff. We now have a research analyst, and we've brought some of the commission records folks from out from under port legal into the commission office to better coordinate. But I think, the 1,700 port staff are our staff. We're not an executive type government. We're a board with we hire the executive. He's not independently elected or hired. But there are some advantages of beefing up commission staff, but I would be cautious in how I do that. And then changes, there's been proposals, well, maybe we should have the governor appoint the port commission, or maybe we should combine to come on the Seattle Commission. I think there's merit in some various proposals, but as I think through them, I think I still come back to directly elected commissioners by King County citizens is the best model.
Elizabeth and John?
So, I'm not sure you can answer the full part of this, but I hope you can, and it's another part. So, who created the stadium district, and when they did create it, did they consult with the port? And what's the port's strategy for combating the effects of that stadium district?
Good question, and I will have to plead ignorance on part of that. The stadium district was created well before my time, I think, when I was a young kid, and the Kingdom was being built and the Seahawks came to town. But I think, you talk to some Port old timers, and particularly with Safeco Field, when that was going forward some 15 years ago, there were a lot of things promised to the industrial community to get the industrial community comfortable with Safeco Field going in there that have never been delivered. The Lander Street overpass that would go over 8 rail tracks. 15 years ago, it was a $180 million project. It was never delivered. The money was reprogrammed to Mercer Street mess, which also actually helps the port in that, getting busloads of cruise passengers up to Smith Cove and getting, freight trucks back and forth to Fisherman's Terminal. I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
Yeah, well, I'm not saying what your strategy was to combat the effects of the stadium district.
Well, we're really, we want to have a seat at the table. We want to be we want to be a good neighbor, and work with the county and the city, but we also need to represent our interests. Again, that region creates some $3 billion a year in business revenue. It's a third of the city's tax base. It's critical to our economy, so we've been being a good partner, but really being vocal with our interests.
John and then Michael.
I wouldn't have thought to ask this question, except it came up earlier in our interview process. Apparently, some years ago, there were difficulties with corporate credit cards issued to commissioners. And in order for transparency, they put the receipts online.
Yes.
And it was mentioned earlier that that's 5 months late in 5 months. As someone with oversight responsibility, not executive responsibility, can you explain why that wasn't?
Yeah, and that's really bothered me, frankly. I'm all for transparency, but I think when we do commit to being transparent, we have to follow through with those commitments. And there's been a lot of personnel changes within the commission office. We had, actually, when the whole credit card issues were sort of at their height, we were going through transitions and things fell through the cracks. And now we brought on one new executive assistant, but there's 2 positions and we're looking to bring on another. So, that's not by way of excuse. It's just because I do think we've fallen short on that. But hopefully once we get the other position hired, we can catch up on that and be good at putting that timely on the web going forward.
I have one that I saw, Clayton. So this is actually just sort of curiosity. So I'm a real nerd and I check the PDC almost every day. Did the mayor of Auburn just file against you?
I heard rumor that he was thinking about it, but I haven't actually seen.
So it is that Peter B. Lewis.
Yeah, okay, so he has filed against me.
Yeah, there is a Peter B. Lewis who hasn't filed against his name. But any idea why he's running or what he's doing?
No, it's interesting because he approached me. We've had, obviously, you guys know, we've just filled 2 open seats. And he approached me and I said, hey, Pete, I think you have good experience. The Kent Valley represents the 2nd largest warehousing district on the West Coast, second to the LA area. It's critical to keep that warehousing district healthy for both, not only the port of sales, but the port of Tacoma. And to have someone with good knowledge about how all that operates, I think, he would make a good commissioner, but instead of applying for an open seat, he decided to delay and challenge me, which I'm not quite sure. I think I have a good record as a port commissioner. I think I bring some aspects to the table as a port commissioner that neither my colleagues nor he has. I've done work in the airline industry, and the airport, although here, the seaport looms large, the airport actually represents 70% of the port's revenue in what we do.
Okay, Clayton?
Some candidates and even commissioners have stated that federal law either precludes or vastly complicates allowing contract drivers to organize. If you could tell us whether that's the case, and if so, please elucidate.
Well, yeah, it vastly complicates to precluding, I mean, at the very least, some would argue under federal law precludes. I mean, they tracked that down to the Port of Los Angeles, and the American Trucking Association brought a lawsuit, and they've so far succeeded through the federal court process. I mean, the American Trucking Association succeeded in saying that that's illegal. Here, you know, so at the federal level, a couple of years ago, the Clean Ports Act was proposed, which would allow localities to address that in the best way they saw fit. I supported the Port Commission resolution in support of the Clean Ports Act. Most of our delegation and supported the Clean Ports Act, and that would have given us the leeway to address it how we see fit. I mean, there are some issues because if we push up the trucking costs, then that impacts our competitiveness. But on the other hand, it's a social justice issue, in my opinion. So we have to continue to figure out how to address it.
Quick, so we're about out of time. If you want to take 30 seconds for a close.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for having me. I've been honored to have the 36th district endorsement in the past. You endorsed me for my re-election campaign in 2009, and I would be really thrilled to be considered for an endorsement this time around. I think I listed some of the early endorsements I've gotten in early considerations. I think I have a strong progressive record at the port, and your endorsement would be a big help in terms of, well, I have Pete Lewis, who's an Auburn Republican, and I also have someone in the 36th, I think. He's a Belltown resident computer software engineer. His big issue seems to be police cameras on the waterfront. But I think by having your endorsement and a lot of good endorsements, that will help me retain my seat.
Great, thank you very much.